There are places in this world where stone breathes with ancient memory, where carved serpents seem to shift when shadow crosses their coils, where the boundary between myth and reality grows thin as morning mist over sacred water. In the heart of Southeast Asia, from the emerald jungles of Thailand to the temple spires of Cambodia, from the mountain kingdoms of Laos to the river valleys of Myanmar, one figure dominates the landscape of the sacred and the sublime. They rise from temple balustrades with hoods spread wide, multiple heads crowned in divine fury and protection, their stone eyes watching every threshold between the mortal world and realms beyond human comprehension. These are the Naga, the seven-headed serpent gods, whose presence has shaped the spiritual architecture of an entire region for more than 2,000 years. Welcome to Echoes of the Old World, where we journey beyond the veil of the mundane to explore the living mythologies that continue to shape human consciousness. If this is your first time crossing this threshold with us, consider subscribing and joining a community that refuses to let the old stories fade into silence. Here, we understand that mythology is not dead history locked in dusty academic texts, but a breathing tradition that speaks to the deepest currents of human experience: fear, wonder, and the eternal dance between civilization and the wild forces we can never fully control. Before we descend into the depths where the Naga dwell, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me where in this world you're watching from right now. Are you in the lands where the Naga still guard temple gates? Or are you discovering these ancient serpents from halfway across the globe? Your perspective matters, because these stories belong to all of us, echoing across cultures and centuries to remind us of truths we've always known, but sometimes forget. Now, let us begin our descent into waters both literal and metaphorical, into the coiled mythology of beings who embody the fundamental duality of existence itself. The Naga are not monsters in the Western sense, not demons to be vanquished or evil to be destroyed. They are something far more complex, far more ancient, and infinitely more essential to the cosmic order. They are the guardians of threshold spaces, the protectors of water sources upon which all life depends, the embodiment of both terrible destruction and life-giving nourishment. To understand the Naga is to understand that the universe operates on principles far more nuanced than simple good versus evil. That divinity itself can wear scales and venom alongside blessing and protection. Picture yourself standing before the western entrance of Angkor Wat as dawn breaks over Cambodia. That moment when darkness surrenders to light and the world holds its breath between states of being. The causeway stretches before you, a stone bridge crossing the moat that surrounds this mountain temple. And flanking both sides of this sacred path are balustrades carved in the form of massive serpents. These are not decorative elements added for aesthetic pleasure. They are Naga, and their presence here is deliberate, essential, transformative. Each serpent body stretches dozens of feet in length, held aloft by rows of divine attendants frozen in stone. And at the end of each balustrade rises the most arresting sight: 7 cobra heads fanning outward in a magnificent hood, mouths slightly parted, eyes alert and aware, watching every soul that dares to cross from the ordinary world into the sacred precinct beyond. The number 7 is not arbitrary, not chosen for mere symmetry or artistic balance. In the cosmology that birthed these guardians, 7 represents completion, cosmic order, the full spectrum of spiritual authority. A single-headed Naga might guard a village stream or mine a shrine. 3 heads denote increased power and territorial domain. 5 heads mark significant spiritual authority. But 7 heads belong to Naga royalty, to beings whose power approaches that of gods themselves. Some traditions speak of 9-headed Naga kings, rulers of entire river systems and underwater kingdoms, beings so ancient and powerful that even the gods treat them with careful respect. The Naga carved into Angkor Wat's balustrades wear 7 heads, because this temple is not just sacred, it is the axis mundi, the cosmic mountain, the center point where heaven, earth, and the underworld converge. But who are these beings beyond their magnificent stone representations? What do they possess? What powers do they wield? What relationship have they maintained with humanity across millennia of recorded history and uncounted centuries before writing existed to capture their stories? The Naga are semi-divine serpent beings whose origins stretch back to the earliest Hindu and Buddhist cosmologies, yet their essence predates even these ancient traditions. They are fundamentally connected to water in all its forms: rivers that sustain civilizations, underground springs that bubble forth in secret grottos, monsoon rains that determine whether crops flourish or populations starve, and the primordial cosmic ocean from which all existence emerged. Where there is water, there may be Naga, and where Naga dwell, that water becomes something more than mere liquid. It becomes charged with divine presence and potential. Their appearance, as recorded in countless temple carvings, manuscript illuminations, and oral traditions, reveals their hybrid straddling multiple realms of existence. From the waist upward, they often manifest with humanoid features, beautiful and terrible in equal measure, crowned with elaborate headdresses that mark their royal status. Their faces can be serene as Buddha in meditation, or fierce as wrathful deities protecting the Dharma from corruption. But from the waist downward, the true serpentine asserts itself in coils of scaled power, bodies thick as ancient tree trunks, capable of crushing stone or parting rivers with casual flicks of their tails. The hood is their most distinctive feature, spreading wide when they rear up to full height, creating that iconic cobra silhouette that has become synonymous with divine protection throughout Southeast Asian iconography. When a Naga spreads its hood in the presence of sacred beings, or during moments of cosmic significance, those multiple heads fan outward in a display that is simultaneously threatening and sheltering, a reminder that protection and destruction are often two faces of the same divine power. Their scales shimmer with colors that seem to shift depending on the light and the observer's state of spiritual awareness. Temple artists depict them in gold leaf and precious pigments, deep emerald greens that echo jungle, canopies, midnight blues that mirror the depths of sacred pools, iridescent patterns that catch torchlight and seem to ripple with inner life. Some traditions speak of Naga whose scales reflect their elemental affinity: water Naga shimmering blue and silver, earth Naga bearing brown and gold, while the most powerful among them display scales that seem to contain entire galaxies, cosmic patterns too complex for mortal eyes to fully comprehend. Their eyes, whether carved in stone or described in ancient texts, possess an intelligence that is decidedly not human, not even humanoid, but something older and stranger, a consciousness that measured time in geological epochs before humanity emerged to name things and build civilizations on their riverbanks. The relationship between Naga and humanity has never been simple friendship or straightforward enmity, but rather a complex covenant built on mutual respect and clearly defined boundaries. Humans depend on the waters the Naga control, need the rains they can grant or withhold, require their protection from spiritual threats and cosmic imbalances. In return, the Naga demand reverence, proper ritual observance, and most critically, respect for the natural world they embody. They are neither benevolent spirits, distributing blessings freely, nor malevolent demons seeking human destruction for sadistic pleasure. They are primordial forces of granted consciousness and will, capable of great generosity toward those who honor them properly, and equally capable of devastating retribution against those who pollute their waters, desecrate their shrines, or show contempt for the ancient protocols that govern human interaction with the divine. This is the threshold we stand upon now, the beginning of a journey into one of Southeast Asia's most enduring and powerful mythological traditions. In the chapters ahead, we will trace the Naga from their origins in the churning of the cosmic ocean to their role in founding entire kingdoms, from their appearance as Buddha's protector during his moment of enlightenment to their continued presence in modern festivals and reported sightings in the Mekong River's mysterious depths. We will explore why the number of their heads matters, how temple architecture literally embodies their protective presence, and what these ancient serpent gods reveal about the relationship between humanity and the natural forces we can never fully control, but must learn to respect if we hope to survive. The Naga wait for no one, but they watch everything, their stone eyes alert at every threshold, their living presence still felt in every river and rain-fed stream. Let us proceed with proper reverence into their domain, and may we emerge with wisdom earned rather than warnings ignored. Before there were temples carved from stone, before human civilization raised its first cities along riverbanks, before even the gods themselves had fully emerged into their divine roles, there was the ocean. Not the ocean as we understand it today, bounded by continental shelves and charted by sailors, but the cosmic ocean, the primordial waters from which all existence would eventually crystallize. This was not mere water, but the fundamental substance of potential itself, containing within its infinite depths every possibility, every future form, every soul and story that would ever manifest across the wheel of existence. Within these waters, coiled and waiting in the darkness before creation began its work, dwelt the first Naga, serpentine consciousness older than time itself, guardians of the boundary between nothingness and being. The great Hindu cosmological texts, particularly the Puranas and the Mahabharata, preserve accounts of the event that would transform these primordial serpents from vague potential into manifest divinity. This is the story of Samudra Manthan, the churning of the cosmic ocean, an event so fundamental to the Hindu understanding of creation that it has been depicted in temple reliefs and manuscript paintings for millennia. The gods, the Devas, found themselves locked in eternal conflict with their counterparts and enemies, the Asuras, both sides seeking the ultimate prize, Amrita, the nectar of immortality that would grant whoever consumed it permanent victory over death itself. Neither side possessed the power to extract this nectar from the cosmic ocean alone. And so, despite their enmity, they entered into an uneasy alliance, agreeing to work together to churn the primordial waters and bring forth the treasures hidden in its depths. The mechanics of this churning reveal the cosmic scale of the operation and the Naga's central role in it. Mount Mandara, a sacred peak of immense size and spiritual power, was uprooted from the earth to serve as the churning rod. The cosmic serpent, Vasuki, king among Naga and a being of unimaginable length and strength, agreed to serve as the churning rope, his body wrapped multiple times around the mountain. The Devas grasped one end of Vasuki's body, the Asuras seized the other, and together they began to pull back and forth in a rhythm that would last for thousands of years, turning the mountain, churning the ocean, agitating the fundamental substance of reality itself. Lord Vishnu, in his avatar as Kurma the cosmic turtle, dove beneath the churning mountain to support its weight, ensuring it would not sink into the ocean floor and end the operation before the nectar could be retrieved. Thus began one of the most violent and creative acts in Hindu cosmology, a divine churning that would bring forth both wonders and terrors from the depths. From this violent agitation emerged treasures beyond counting, each one a fundamental aspect of existence crystallizing into manifest form. The goddess Lakshmi, embodiment of prosperity and fortune, rose from the foam. The celestial wish-fulfilling tree Kalpavriksha emerged, capable of granting any desire. The divine physician Dhanvantari appeared bearing the pot of Amrita itself. The moon god Chandra came forth to illuminate the night sky. But not everything that emerged from those depths was benevolent or beautiful. Before the nectar appeared, the churning released hala hala, the most deadly poison in existence, a substance so toxic and powerful that its very presence threatened to dissolve all of creation back into the void. The gods and demons recoiled in terror as this poison spread across the surface of the cosmic ocean. But Lord Shiva, in his role as the destroyer who protects through destruction, swallowed the poison to save existence itself. It stained his throat blue, giving him the epithet Nilakantha, the blue-throated one, a mark he bears eternally as testament to his sacrifice. Throughout this cosmic churning, Vasuki endured unimaginable strain and pain. The gods and demons pulled his body back and forth with such force that friction burned his scales, and from his mouths poured forth flames and toxic breath that scorched the earth. Yet he did not break, did not fail in his role as the rope that would churn creation itself. This sacrifice, this willingness to serve the cosmic order, even at great personal cost, established the Naga as beings fundamentally aligned with Dharma, with the proper functioning of the universe according to divine law. They were not created by the gods as servants or tools, but rather existed before the current cosmic cycle began, ancient enough to be enlisted as partners in the very act of creation. This grants them a status that is semi-divine, neither fully God nor fully mortal, but something that exists in the liminal space between categories, a threshold existence that reflects their role as guardians of boundaries and transitions. The relationship between Naga and the divine order that emerged from the churning is complex and multifaceted. They are not subjects of the gods in the simple hierarchical sense, but rather allies bound by mutual respect and cosmic necessity. When Lord Vishnu reclines in his cosmic rest between the cycles of creation and destruction, he does not rest on a simple bed, but upon the coils of Shesha. The great thousand-headed Naga, also known as Ananta, the Endless One. Shesha's multiple hoods spread above Vishnu as protection, creating a canopy that shields the preserver god during his periods of cosmic sleep. This image, reproduced in countless temple carvings and paintings, reveals the intimate relationship between supreme divinity and the Naga, a partnership where the serpent provides both foundation and protection for the god himself. The symbolism is profound. Even the gods require the support and shelter of forces older and more fundamental than themselves. Buddhism, as it spread from India throughout Southeast Asia, absorbed and adapted the Naga mythology, integrating these ancient serpents into its own cosmological framework. In Buddhist cosmology, the Naga are classified as one of the 8 classes of non-human beings, supernatural entities that exist alongside humans, gods, demons, and spirits in the complex web of sentient existence. They possess their own realms, underwater kingdoms of splendor and complexity, where Naga kings rule over vast territories and populations. These are not primitive creatures dwelling in caves and caverns, but sophisticated civilizations with their own courts, their own arts and sciences, their own systems of governance and spiritual practice. Many Naga are depicted as ardent followers of Buddhist teachings, attending the Buddha's sermons and protecting the Dharma from threats both physical and spiritual. This alignment with Buddhist principles further reinforces their role as guardians of cosmic order, beings whose power is directed toward the preservation of truth and the proper functioning of the universe. Yet for all their alignment with Dharma and divine order, the Naga retains something irreducibly wild and unpredictable in there. They are not tame, not fully domesticated into the service of human religious frameworks. Ancient texts are filled with warnings about the consequences of disrespecting or angering Naga. They can withhold rain, causing drought and famine. They can poison waters, making rivers and wells toxic to all who drink from them. They can send floods to sweep away villages and cities. They can manifest as beautiful humans to seduce mortals, leading them into underwater realms from which there is no return. This capacity for destruction is not evidence of evil or malicious intent, but rather a reflection of the fundamental truth the Naga embody. The forces of are not moral actors in the human sense. Water gives life, and water destroys. Rain nourishes crops, and rain erodes mountains. The same river that sustains a civilization can rise in flood and wash that civilization away. The Naga, as embodiments of water and its powers, carry this same duality within their being. Their origins in the cosmic ocean, their role in the churning that brought forth creation itself, their intimate relationship with the highest gods, and their own independent kingdoms and civilizations, all combine to create beings of profound complexity. They are neither angels nor demons, neither simple monsters to be feared, nor benevolent spirits offering unconditional protection. They are what they have always been, ancient consciousness that predates human categories, forces of granted intelligence and will, beings who operate according to their own logic and their own understanding of cosmic law. To interact with Naga requires not prayers alone, but proper respect, appropriate offerings, careful observance of the protocols that govern the relationship between humanity and the powers that sustain our existence. Understand them as allies who demand reverence rather than subjects who offer servitude, and you begin to glimpse the true of these beings, born from waters older than worlds, serpents whose coils have supported gods and churned the ocean of creation itself into the reality we now inhabit and too often take for granted. Stand before any ancient temple in Southeast Asia, where the Naga have been carved into stone, and you will notice something that transcends mere artistic choice or decorative whimsy. The sculptors who shaped these beings were not inventing fanciful creatures from imagination alone, but rather translating a complex spiritual taxonomy into physical form, encoding layers of meaning into every curve of scale and spread of hood. The anatomy of the Naga is not arbitrary, but deeply intentional. Each physical feature corresponding to specific aspects of power, spiritual authority, and cosmic function. To understand their form is to begin deciphering the visual language through which ancient cultures express their understanding of divine hierarchy and the forces that govern existence itself. Begin with the most immediately striking feature, the hood. When a Naga rears up to full height, whether in stone representation or as described in oral traditions and sacred texts, the hood spreads wide in that unmistakable cobra silhouette that has become synonymous with divine presence throughout the region. This is not mere threat display, though it certainly carries overtones of warning and power. The expanded hood creates a canopy, a shelter, a protective barrier between the sacred and the profane. In countless temple reliefs, you see this hood spread above the heads of meditating Buddhas, enlightened masters, and royal figures, creating an umbrella of divine protection. The hood marks the boundary of sacred space declaring that what falls beneath its shadow exists under the guardianship of powers older than human kingdoms and more enduring than stone itself. The scales of this hood often display intricate patterns, sometimes depicted with jewel-like ornamentations or symbols that indicate the specific Naga's rank and territorial domain. The heads themselves demand our closest attention, for here, the true complexity of Naga taxonomy reveals itself. A Naga is rarely depicted with a single head, and when such representations occur, they indicate beings of lesser power or those serving specific limited functions. The single-headed Naga might guard a village well or a minor shrine, protect a specific family lineage, or serve as messenger between the underwater kingdoms and the surface world. They possess power, certainly, enough to grant small blessings or deliver targeted curses, but they operate on a localized scale, their influence measured in feet and yards rather than miles and provinces. These are the Naga most humans might encounter in daily life, the ones who inhabit the stream where water is drawn or the pond where children play, requiring daily respect and proper offerings, but not the elaborate rituals reserved for their more powerful kin. When a Naga manifests with 3 heads, we witness a significant elevation in both power and spiritual authority. 3 is a number of completion in many spiritual traditions, representing the fundamental triadic of existence: creation, preservation, destruction, or, alternatively, body, speech, and mind in Buddhist cosmology. A 3-headed Naga commands respect over a wider territory, perhaps an entire river system, or a sacred lake fed by multiple sources. They appear in temple architecture guarding secondary entrances or positioned at strategic points where spiritual energy requires channeling and control. The 3 heads can move independently, each watching a different direction, making them exceptionally difficult to deceive or surprise. In mythological accounts, 3-headed Naga often serve as intermediaries between humans and the higher echelons of serpent divinity, translating petitions upward and conveying divine will downward through the hierarchy of the underwater realms. 5 heads mark another substantial increase in power and complexity. 5 represents the elements in many Asian cosmologies: earth, water, fire, air, and space or ether. A 5-headed Naga embodies mastery over these fundamental building blocks of material existence, capable of manipulating weather patterns, causing earthquakes, or manifesting phenomena that blur the line between natural disaster and divine intervention. They guard major temples, protect important pilgrimage sites, and command the allegiance of lesser Naga throughout their domains. The 5 heads fan outward in perfect symmetry, creating a visual mandala of power and protection. Temple builders position 5-headed Naga at crucial architectural junctions, places where the structure transitions from outer courtyard to inner sanctuary, from the profane space accessible to all to the sacred core where only the initiated may tread. Their presence at these thresholds declares the passage beyond this point requires not just physical access, but spiritual preparation and proper respect for the powers that dwell within. 7 heads elevate the Naga into the realm of true royalty, beings whose power approaches that of gods themselves, and whose territories encompass vast geographical regions. 7 represents completion and totality, the full spectrum of spiritual authority made manifest. The 7-headed Naga appear predominantly in major temple complexes like Angkor Wat, Angkor Thom, and other sites of supreme religious and political importance. They do not merely guard these places, but actively participate in their sacred function, their presence transforming the temple from human construction into cosmic axis, the point where heaven, earth, and the underworld converge. When ancient kings commissioned 7-headed Naga for their temples, they were making a statement about the of their rule, claiming divine legitimacy through association with beings of this magnitude. The symmetry of 7 heads fanning outward creates a near-perfect semicircle, a hood so expansive it can shelter entire assemblies of devotees or cover the approach to massive gateways. Each head possesses its own distinct personality and awareness, together forming a collective consciousness of terrifying intelligence and power. 9 heads represent the absolute pinnacle of Naga hierarchy, reserved for the great serpent kings who rule entire underwater kingdoms and command the allegiance of thousands of lesser Naga. 9 is the number of ultimate completion, 3 times 3 representing mastery over all realms of existence: the underworld, the earth, and the heavens. A 9-headed Naga king possesses power that even gods must acknowledge and respect. They appear rarely in temple architecture, their representation reserved for only the most sacred contexts and the most powerful ritual purposes. Ancient texts speak of 9-headed Naga, whose domains stretch across multiple river systems, whose underwater palaces rival the celestial cities of the gods in splendor and sophistication, whose councils determine whether rains will fall or drought will parch the land. When such beings manifest to humans, the encounter transforms from mere supernatural experience into audience with divinity itself, requiring protocols as elaborate as approaching any major deity. The body below these magnificent heads continues the pattern of symbolic meaning encoded in physical form. From the waist upward, Naga often manifest with humanoid torsos, arms, and faces that can range from serenely beautiful to terrifyingly fierce depending on context and mood. This anthropomorphic upper body allows them to interact with humans and gods on more equal terms, to wear crowns and jeweled ornaments that mark their royal status, to hold ritual objects or weapons that signify their role as protectors of Dharma. The musculature depicted in temple carvings shows bodies of divine perfection, neither weakened by mortality nor corrupted by age, frozen in eternal prime. Male Naga display the powerful physiques of warriors and kings, while female Nagi possess beauty described in ancient texts as capable of bewitching even the most disciplined ascetics, their grace and allure serving as tests of spiritual fortitude for those who encounter them. From the waist downward, the serpentine asserts itself in coils of massive scale and power. These are not the bodies of common snakes, but serpents of mythological proportion, coils thick as tree trunks, lengths measured in dozens or hundreds of feet, capable of crushing some stone or parting waters with casual movements. The scales shimmer with colors that carry meaning. Deep emerald green speaking of jungle rivers and hidden springs. Midnight blues reflecting the profound depths of sacred lakes. Golden hues marking solar connections and royal lineage. Silver tones indicating lunar associations and mastery over tides and cycles. Some traditions speak of scales that shift color according to the Naga's mood or intention, turning dark as storm clouds when anger rises, brightening to jewel-like brilliance when pleased or blessing supplicants. The tail ends in various configurations depending on regional tradition, sometimes tapering to a point, sometimes splitting into multiple smaller serpents, occasionally terminating in elaborate fins or decorative flourishes that enhance swimming ability or serve ceremonial purposes. Regional variations add further layers of complexity to Naga anatomy. Thai traditions often emphasize the decorative and ornamental aspects, depicting Naga with elaborate crowns, jeweled collars, and accessories that mark their integration into Buddhist cosmology. Cambodian representations tend toward more fierce and powerful forms, reflecting the Naga's role in national foundation myths and their status as progenitors of royal lineages. Laotian Naga often appear more serpentine throughout their entire length, with less anthropomorphic features, emphasizing their essential as primordial water spirits. Myanmar's traditions sometimes blend Naga characteristics with those of other mythological beings, creating hybrid forms that reflect the complex history of cultural exchange and religious syncretism in the region. Yet, despite these variations, certain core features remain constant. The multiple heads, the cobra hood, the combination of beauty and terror, the embodiment of water's jewel as life-giver and destroyer. The anatomy of the Naga, whether carved in stone or described in ancient palm leaf manuscripts, speaks a visual language of power, protection, and the eternal presence of forces that transcend human categories and human control. Tipo, capítulo, número. 4. Título, Masters of the Waters. Texto, título. Chapter 4, Masters of the Waters. Contenido. Water is not a passive element in Southeast Asian cosmology, not merely liquid filling geographical depressions or flowing along channels carved by erosion and time. Water is alive, conscious, inhabited by intelligences that predate human civilization and will endure long after our cities have crumbled back into the earth from which they rose. Every river carries within its current the presence of Naga guardians. Every lake conceals in its depths underwater palaces where serpent kings hold court. Every spring that bubbles up from hidden aquifers marks a threshold between the human world and the subterranean realms where the Naga dwell in splendor and shadow. To understand the Naga is to understand that in this region, water belongs to them first, and humanity exists as tenants who must negotiate for access, rather than owners claiming absolute dominion over resources. The great rivers of Southeast Asia carry more than water from highland sources to the sea, more than sediment that builds deltas and fertile floodplains, more than fish and commerce, and the physical necessities of civilization. They carry the presence of Naga, whose power scales with the magnitude of the waterway they inhabit. A small stream might host a single-headed Naga of limited power and localized influence, respected by the village that draws its water, but not feared beyond that immediate community. But rivers like the Mekong, the Chao Phraya, the Irrawaddy, these massive arteries that have sustained empires and fed millions across millennia, these belong to Naga royalty of the highest order. The 7-headed and 9-headed serpent kings who command such domains possess power that determines whether entire regions prosper or perish, whether crops flourish in abundance or populations flee in desperate migration from drought-stricken lands. The Mekong River, snaking through China, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam, serves as perhaps the most sacred of all Naga domains in mainland Southeast Asia. Local traditions speak of the Fire Naga, the great serpent lords who dwell in the river's deepest channels and underwater caves, particularly in the stretch near the Thai-Laotian border, where the river carves through dramatic gorges and creates conditions of mysterious depth and turbulent power. These are not metaphorical or symbolic beings relegated to ancient myth, but entities that contemporary communities still acknowledge, respect, and occasionally claim to witness. Fishermen observe protocols before casting nets, offering prayers and small sacrifices to request permission to take fish from waters the Naga control. Construction projects near the river require ceremonies to appease the serpent guardians, lest disrupted waters and disturbed territories provoke retribution in the form of floods, accidents, or mysterious illnesses that strike workers and engineers alike. The relationship between Naga and rainfall reveals another dimension of their mastery over water in all its forms and phases. Monsoon, rains, determine survival in agrarian societies throughout Southeast Asia, arriving with seasonal regularity that allows farmers to plant with confidence, or failing to appear in patterns that spell catastrophe for entire provinces. Ancient texts and oral traditions consistently attribute the arrival and intensity of monsoons to the will and mood of the Naga kings who control such phenomena. A pleased and properly honored Naga ensures gentle rains that soak fields without destroying them, steady precipitation that replenishes reservoirs and fills irrigation channels without causing destructive floods. An angered or neglected Naga might withhold rain entirely, leaving skies cloudless through seasons when water should fall, watching impassively as crops wither and populations face starvation. Alternatively, an enraged Naga can summon torrential downpours that wash away villages, destroy dikes, turn rivers into raging torrents that devour everything in their path. Underground water sources reveal yet another aspect of Naga dominion: the hidden aquifers and subterranean rivers that feed surface springs and wells. These underground waterways represent the most intimate territory of the Naga, the places where their palaces actually exist according to traditional belief, carved from living rock deep beneath mountains or extending in vast chambers under river bottoms and lake beds. When a well is dug and strikes water, that moment marks not just successful engineering, but a successful negotiation with the Naga, who control access to those hidden reserves. Traditional well-digging ceremonies throughout the region include offerings and prayers directed toward the Naga, requesting permission to tap into their domain and promising ongoing respect and proper treatment of the water source. Springs that emerge naturally from hillsides or cave mouths are often marked with shrines where locals leave offerings, acknowledging these places as direct manifestations of Naga presence, portals between their underwater realm and the surface world humans inhabit. The physical geography of Naga habitation follows specific patterns that reveal their preferences and territorial boundaries. They favor places where water exhibits unusual characteristics, pools that remain mysteriously still even when rivers around them flow swiftly, spots where currents create whirlpools or strange patterns, sections of riverbank where the water appears darker or deeper than surrounding areas, caves that open at water level or slightly below, allowing river or lake water to flow into subterranean chambers, represent particularly sacred Naga sites, thresholds between worlds that only the very brave or very foolish approach without proper preparation and protection. Islands in the middle of rivers or lakes often appear in mythology as Naga territory, places where the Serpent guardians maintain above-water palaces or emerge to sun themselves when they choose to briefly adopt fully serpentine form and bask in warmth denied them in the cool depths they normally inhabit. Lakes hold special significance in Naga cosmology, representing more controlled and bounded domains than rivers with their constant flow and connection to distant territories. A lake forms a complete kingdom, a self-contained realm where a Naga king or queen can maintain absolute authority without concern for overlapping jurisdictions or territorial. Tipo, capitulo, numero, fig, titulo, the stone serpents of Angkor. Texto, titulo, Chapter 5, the stone serpents of Angkor. Contenido, stone should not breathe, should not pulse with presence, should not watch the living with eyes carved by human hands centuries ago. Yet stand before the temple complexes of Angkor in the pre-dawn darkness. That liminal hour when night still clings to the earth, but the sky begins its inevitable surrender to light. And you will feel what millions of pilgrims and travelers have felt across nearly 900 years of continuous human witness. The Naga carved into these temples are not mere decoration, not artistic flourishes added to beautify otherwise functional architecture. They are guardians frozen in eternal vigilance, protectors whose stone forms capture and preserve something essential about the beings they represent, creating physical manifestations of the threshold between human ambition and divine sanction, between the mortal realm and the cosmic forces that legitimize earthly power through supernatural authority. Angkor Wat stands as perhaps the most magnificent expression of Naga integration into sacred architecture ever achieved by human civilization. Approach from the west, the traditional direction of entry, and you must cross the causeway that spans the moat surrounding the temple complex. This is no ordinary bridge, but a ritual pathway whose very structure encodes spiritual meaning in stone and symbolic geometry. The causeway stretches more than 600 feet from the outer gate to the temple proper, and flanking both sides for this entire distance run, balustrades carved in the form of massive Naga bodies. These are not small decorative elements, but serpents of monumental scale, their stone bodies thick as fully grown trees, held aloft by rows of attendant figures carved in postures of eternal labor and devotion. The attendants, divine beings and celestial warriors, grasp the Naga bodies in what appears at first to be a tug of war. But this image references something far more profound than simple conflict. The pose recalls the churning of the cosmic ocean, that primordial event we explored earlier, where gods and demons work together to extract the nectar of immortality from the universal waters. Here at Angkor Wat, the architectural reference transforms the causeway into a symbolic churning rod, and every person who walks across it participates in a reenactment of cosmic creation itself. You do not simply walk to the temple, you traverse the axis mundi. You pass through the very mechanism by which chaos transforms into order, by which potential crystallizes into manifest reality. The Naga balustrades mark this causeway as sacred space, their presence declaring that beyond this point, normal rules of existence no longer fully apply, that you have entered territory where the divine and earthly interpenetrate with intensity sufficient to transform stone into breathing presence. At the end of each balustrade, rising above the rows of carved attendants and the serpent body they support, emerge the Naga heads themselves. 7 heads fan outward in that magnificent cobra hood, mouths slightly parted to reveal fangs and forked tongues, eyes wide and alert, despite centuries of wind and rain, and the relentless erosion of tropical weather against sandstone. Each head possesses subtle variations in expression, suggesting individual personality even within the collective consciousness of the 7-headed form. Some heads appear more fierce, suitable for confronting threats and driving away malicious spirits that might attempt to infiltrate the sacred precinct. Others seem more serene, appropriate for blessing pilgrims and devotees who approach with proper reverence and pure intention. Together, they create a spectrum of divine mood and response, embodying the Naga's fundamental as beings capable of both terrible wrath and profound protection, depending on how they are approached and the character of those seeking passage into the temple beyond. The symbolism extends beyond mere representation to active spiritual function. According to traditional Khmer cosmology, the moat surrounding Angkor Wat represents the cosmic ocean, and the temple itself rises as Mount Meru, the sacred mountain at the center of Buddhist and Hindu universe, axis of all creation and home of the gods. The causeway with its Naga balustrades becomes the rainbow bridge, the pathway between the human world and the divine realm, guarded by serpent beings whose permission is required for safe passage. To cross without respect, without proper spiritual preparation, would be to risk the Naga's displeasure and the consequences that follow from such arrogance. The architectural program transforms physical movement through space into spiritual journey, through states of consciousness, each step along the causeway marking progression from mundane awareness toward the heightened state, appropriate for encountering the sacred at the temple's heart. Angkor Thom, the great city built by King Jayavarman VII in the late 12th and early 13th centuries, demonstrates another architectural application of Naga symbolism on even more massive scale. The city walls extend in a perfect square, each side measuring approximately 2 miles, enclosing an area of more than 3 square miles. 4 gates pierce these walls at the cardinal directions, plus a 5th gate on the eastern wall, and each gate carries above it a tower face, carved with the serene countenance of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, looking outward in all 4 directions, with eyes that see everything and judge with divine wisdom. But the approaches to these gates, the causeways crossing the moat that surrounds the city walls, these belong entirely to the Naga and their eternal reenactment of cosmic drama. Each causeway features 54 figures on each side, demons on the left and gods on the right, and both groups grasp the body of a massive Naga that stretches the entire length of the approach. The Naga here manifests with even more spectacular heads than those at Angkor Wat. Multiple cobra heads rising in magnificent display at the causeway's end, creating an image of such power and presence that even weathered and damaged examples retain the ability to inspire awe in contemporary visitors. The total effect, multiplied across 5. Tipo, capítulo, número, 6, título, The Princess Beneath the Waves, texto, título. Chapter 6, The Princess Beneath the Waves, contenido. Every nation builds its identity upon foundation myths, stories that explain not just political origins, but the deeper spiritual legitimacy that transforms conquered territory into sacred homeland, that elevates ruling dynasties above mere military success into divinely ordained authority. For Cambodia, this foundational narrative centers on an encounter between worlds, a marriage that joined human ambition with serpent divinity, creating a covenant that would define Khmer identity for millennia. This is the story of Preah Thong and Naing Niak, the Indian prince, and the Naga princess, whose union transformed primordial ocean into habitable land and established the bloodline from which Cambodian kings would claim descent. It is a tale of love, certainly, but more profoundly, it speaks to the fundamental relationship between humanity and the forces of Rai, between civilization's need for territory and the Naga's ancient dominion over waters that covered the earth before humans existed to name continents and draw boundaries on maps. The story begins, as so many transformative tales do, with exile and wandering. Preah Thong, a prince of India whose exact kingdom varies across different tellings, found himself forced to flee his homeland due to political intrigue, family, conflict, or divine prophecy, depending on which version of the narrative one follows. The specific cause matters less than the essential state it creates. Here is a man of royal blood and refined education, cast adrift from everything familiar, voyaging across the ocean toward an unknown fate in lands he has never seen. His ship, driven by storms or guided by destiny, eventually reached the coast of what would become Cambodia. Though at that time, the geography consisted primarily of water, vast stretches of ocean broken only by scattered islands and the mountainous highlands that rose above the primordial flood. This was Naga territory, underwater kingdoms ruled by serpent lords whose power over these domains remained absolute and unchallenged by any human presence. Somarong Neek, the Naga king who ruled this particular stretch of water and the territories beneath its surface, possessed a daughter of extraordinary beauty and intelligence. Naing Neek, whose name translates roughly as Lady Naga or Dragon Princess, embodied all the qualities prized in Naga royalty. Fierce when circumstances demanded fierceness, graceful beyond human comprehension, wise in ways that extended beyond mere intellectual knowledge into intuitive understanding of cosmic principles and natural law. she could manifest in fully serpentine form, a magnificent seven-headed Naga whose scales shimmered with colors that seemed to contain depths impossible for mere pigment to achieve. But she could also assume fully human appearance, and it was in this form that she first encountered the shipwrecked prince on one of the islands that dotted her father's domain. The meeting between Preah Thong and Nyang Nyak carries within it all the charge and significance of worlds colliding, of categories that should remain separate, suddenly discovering mutual attraction that transcends the boundaries meant to keep them apart. Here was a human prince, representative of civilization with its temples and writing systems, its hierarchies and ambitions, its determination to impose order on the chaos of... And here was a Naga princess, embodiment of the primordial waters themselves, ancient beyond his capacity to comprehend, powerful in ways that made his royal authority seem as fragile and temporary as morning mist. Traditional accounts speak of immediate attraction, the kind of recognition that suggests past life connections or destiny working through apparently chance encounters. They spoke beneath palm trees with the sound of waves as their only witness, sharing stories of their respective worlds, discovering that royal blood in different realms might still speak a common language of duty, honor, and the burden of inherited responsibility. Their courtship developed with a speed that suggests both divine intervention and genuine compatibility. Preah Thong proved himself worthy through demonstrations of courage, wisdom, and respect for powers greater than himself. Niang Nik revealed gradually her true, testing whether his love could survive the knowledge that she was not human despite her appearance, that their marriage would join bloodlines never meant to mix, creating offspring who would carry within them both the ambition of humanity and the ancient power of the Naga. When Preah Thong asked permission to marry her, Nyang Nyak brought him before her father, the great Naga king whose approval would determine whether this unprecedented union could proceed, or whether the mortal prince would be sent away to find a bride among his own kind in distant lands. Somarong Nik's response to his daughter's request and the prince's petition reveals the profound generosity and strategic wisdom that characterizes the Naga at their best. The king agreed to the marriage, but more than that, he offered a wedding gift of staggering magnitude and consequence. Using his power over water itself, Somarong Nik drank deeply of the ocean that covered the land, drawing the primordial waters down into his immense serpentine body, swallowing the flood that had prevented human habitation of the territory. As the water level dropped, land emerged from beneath the waves, revealing fertile plains and river valleys suitable for agriculture, for cities, for the establishment of a civilization that would eventually become the Khmer Empire. The Naga king granted this land to his daughter and her human husband, transforming his own aquatic kingdom into terrestrial realm where their children could establish a dynasty that honored both their human and Naga heritage. The symbolism embedded in this act of drainage and transformation carries profound implications for understanding the Cambodian relationship with both land and water. The territory is not conquered from through human effort, but gifted by the Naga themselves, granted by those who held it originally, and whose permission legitimizes all subsequent human occupation. This establishes a covenant more binding than any human law. The land belongs to Cambodia because the Naga chose to give it. And that gift can presumably be withdrawn should humanity violate the terms of respect and proper treatment that accompanied the original grant. Every Cambodian king who claimed descent from this union between Preah Thong and Nyang Nyak implicitly acknowledged Naga blood in his veins, divine serpent power mixed with human ambition, creating rulers who straddled both worlds and could claim authority in both human and supernatural realms. The children born from this marriage inherited characteristics from both parents, establishing bloodlines that would rule Cambodia for generations and creating a population that understood itself as fundamentally connected to the Naga through ancestry, rather than mere cultural mythology. These descendants possessed human form and human consciousness, but traditional accounts credit them with certain qualities inherited from their Naga grandmother: wisdom beyond normal human capacity, intuitive understanding of water and weather patterns, ability to communicate with or at least sense the presence of serpent guardians still dwelling in rivers and lakes throughout the land. The royal family's connection to the Naga remained particularly strong, with some kings claiming ability to commune directly with serpent lords, to negotiate with them for favorable rains or protection from natural disasters that threatened the kingdom. The architectural evidence we examined in the previous chapter gains. Every nation builds its identity upon foundation myths, stories that explain not just political origins, but the deeper spiritual legitimacy that transforms conquered territory into sacred homeland, that elevates ruling dynasties above mere military success into divinely ordained authority. For Cambodia, this foundational narrative centers on an encounter between worlds, a marriage that joined human ambition with serpent divinity, creating a covenant that would define Khmer identity for millennia. This is the story of Preah Thong and Nayang Nayak, the Indian prince and the Naga princess, whose union transformed primordial ocean into habitable land and established the bloodline from which Cambodian kings would claim descent. It's a tale of love, certainly, but more profoundly, it speaks to the fundamental relationship between humanity and the forces of, between civilization's need for territory and the Naga's ancient dominion over waters that covered the earth before humans existed to name continents and draw boundaries on maps. The story begins, as so many transformative tales do, with exile and wandering. Preah Thong, a prince of India, whose exact kingdom varies across different tellings, found himself forced to flee his homeland due to political intrigue, family conflict, or divine prophecy, depending on which version of the narrative one follows. The specific cause matters less than the essential state it creates. Here is a man of royal blood and refined education, cast adrift from everything familiar, voyaging across the ocean toward an unknown fate in lands he has never seen. His ship, driven by storms or guided by destiny, eventually reached the coast of what would become Cambodia, though at that time the geography consisted primarily of water, vast stretches of ocean broken only by scattered islands and the mountainous highlands that rose above the primordial flood. This was Naga territory, underwater kingdoms ruled by serpent lords, whose power over these domains remained absolute and unchallenged by any human presence. Somerong Neek, the Naga king who ruled this particular stretch of water and the territories beneath its surface, possessed a daughter of extraordinary beauty and intelligence. Nayang Neek, whose name translates roughly as Lady Naga or Dragon Princess, embodied all the qualities prized in Naga royalty: fierce when circumstances demanded fierceness, graceful beyond human comprehension, wise in ways that extended beyond mere intellectual knowledge into intuitive understanding of cosmic principles and natural law. She could manifest in fully serpentine form, a magnificent seven-headed Naga, whose scales shimmered with colors that seemed to contain depths impossible for mere pigment to achieve. But she could also assume fully human appearance, and it was in this form that she first encountered the shipwrecked prince on one of the islands that dotted her father's domain. The meeting between Preah Thong and Nayang Nayak carries within it all the charge and significance of worlds colliding, of categories that should remain separate, suddenly discovering mutual attraction that transcends the boundaries meant to keep them apart. Here was a human prince, representative of civilization, with its temples and writing systems, its hierarchies and ambitions, its determination to impose order on the chaos of And here was a Naga princess, embodiment of the primordial waters themselves, ancient beyond his capacity to comprehend, powerful in ways that made his royal authority seem as fragile and temporary as morning mist. Traditional accounts speak of immediate attraction, the kind of recognition that suggests past life connections or destiny working through apparently chance encounters. They spoke beneath palm trees with the sound of waves as their only witness, sharing stories of their respective worlds, discovering that royal blood in different realms might still speak a common language of duty, honor, and the burden of inherited responsibility. Their courtship developed with a speed that suggests both divine intervention and genuine compatibility. Preah Thong proved himself worthy through demonstrations of courage, wisdom, and respect for powers greater than himself. Naang Nak revealed gradually her true, testing whether his love could survive the knowledge that she was not human despite her appearance, that their marriage would join bloodlines never meant to mix, creating offspring who would carry within them both the ambition of humanity and the ancient power of the Naga. When Preah Thong asked permission to marry her, Naang Nak brought him before her father, the great Naga king, whose approval would determine whether this unprecedented union could proceed, or whether the mortal prince would be sent away to find a bride among his own kind in distant lands. Somarong Neek's response to his daughter's request and the prince's petition reveals the profound generosity and strategic wisdom that characterizes the Naga at their best. The king agreed to the marriage, but more than that, he offered a wedding gift of staggering magnitude and consequence. Using his power over water itself, Somarong Neek drank deeply of the ocean that covered the land, drawing the primordial waters down into his immense serpentine body, swallowing the flood that had prevented human habitation of the territory. As the water level dropped, land emerged from beneath the waves, revealing fertile plains and river valleys suitable for agriculture, for cities, for the establishment of a civilization that would eventually become the Khmer Empire. The Naga king granted this land to his daughter and her human husband, transforming his own aquatic kingdom into terrestrial realm, where their children could establish a dynasty that honored both their human and Naga heritage. The symbolism embedded in this act of drainage and transformation carries profound implications for understanding the Cambodian relationship with both land and water. The territory is not conquered through human effort, but gifted by the Naga themselves, granted by those who held it originally and whose permission legitimizes all subsequent human occupation. This establishes a covenant more binding than any human law. The land belongs to Cambodia because the Naga chose to give it, and that gift can presumably be withdrawn should humanity violate the terms of respect and proper treatment that accompanied the original grant. Every Cambodian king who claimed descent from this union between Preah Thong and Naang Nak implicitly acknowledged Naga blood in his veins, divine serpent power mixed with human ambition, creating rulers who straddled both worlds and could claim authority in both human and supernatural realms. The children born from this marriage inherited characteristics from both parents, establishing bloodlines that would rule Cambodia for generations and creating a population that understood itself as fundamentally connected to the Naga through ancestry, rather than mere cultural mythology. These descendants possessed human form and human consciousness, but traditional accounts credit them with certain qualities inherited from their Naga grandmother. Wisdom beyond normal human capacity, intuitive understanding of water and weather patterns, ability to communicate with, or at least sense, the presence of serpent guardians still dwelling in rivers and lakes throughout the land. The royal family's connection to the Naga remained particularly strong, with some kings claiming ability to commune directly with serpent lords, to negotiate with them for favorable rains or protection from natural disasters that threatened the kingdom. The architectural evidence we examined in the previous chapter gains additional meaning when viewed through this foundational narrative. The Naga carved into Angkor Wat and other Khmer temples are not foreign deities imported from India or abstract symbols of Buddhist cosmology, but rather family, ancestors whose blood flows in the veins of the very kings who commissioned these massive stone tributes. When Khmer architects flanked causeways with Naga balustrades, they were not merely following aesthetic conventions, but acknowledging kinship, honouring the maternal line that stretched back to Nieng Niak and her father Somorong Niak, declaring in stone and elaborate carving that Cambodian civilization existed under the protection of beings to whom they were related by blood and ancient covenant. Every temple became a family shrine in this sense, every carved Naga a portrait of distant but undeniable kin. Variations of this foundation story exist throughout Southeast Asia, with different cultures claiming similar unions between human heroes and Naga nobility. Thai traditions speak of parallel marriages between mortal princes and serpent princesses, establishing royal lineages that drew legitimacy from divine serpent blood. Laotian mythology includes comparable narratives, as do the foundation stories of various kingdoms throughout Myanmar. The ubiquity of this narrative pattern reveals something essential about how these cultures understood the relationship between humanity and the natural world, between political authority and supernatural sanction. Kings did not simply rule by right of conquest or human election, but through actual biological connection to the powers that controlled water, weather, and the fundamental forces upon which agricultural civilization depended. To rebel against such a king was not merely political sedition, but violation of cosmic order itself, disruption of the careful balance between human ambition and Naga tolerance that allowed civilization to exist on land the serpents had graciously surrendered from their original ocean domain. The legacy of Preah Thong and Niang Neak extends far beyond ancient history or quaint mythology relegated to children's stories and tourist guidebooks. Contemporary Cambodians still understand their relationship with the Naga through this lens of family connection and inherited obligation. The land remains a gift that requires ongoing gratitude and respect. The waters that feed rice paddies and fill reservoirs belong ultimately to the Naga who granted them, not to human engineers who simply channel flows according to temporary human needs and desires. There are moments in spiritual history when the boundary between myth and documented event blurs into something more profound than either category alone can contain, when the supernatural and the historical interpenetrate so completely that attempting to separate them diminishes both. The story of Mucalinda, the seven-headed Naga king who protected the Buddha during his meditation beneath the Bodhi tree, stands as one of Buddhism's most iconic and enduring images, reproduced in temple art across centuries and continents, carved in stone and cast in bronze, painted on manuscript pages and temple walls from Sri Lanka to Japan. This is not abstract mythology, but a narrative preserved in the earliest Buddhist texts, recorded by communities who understood themselves as witnesses to actual events, describing an encounter between the man who would become enlightened and the Serpent King, whose intervention ensured that enlightenment could occur undisturbed by the forces of and supernatural opposition arrayed against it. The setting is Bodh Gaya in northern India, beneath the pipal tree that would forever after be known as the Bodhi tree, the tree of awakening. Siddhartha Gautama had already spent years in extreme ascetic practice, reducing his body nearly to the point of death in pursuit of liberation from suffering and the cycle of rebirth. He had rejected that path as ultimately futile, accepting food again and regaining enough strength to attempt a different approach. Now he sat in meditation with absolute determination, vowing not to rise from this spot until he achieved complete enlightenment, or died in the attempt. The text records this as occurring during the month of Vaisakha, corresponding roughly to April or May in the Western calendar, a time when the monsoon rains had not yet arrived, but storm systems could appear with sudden violence, unleashing downpours and winds, capable of making meditation difficult, if not impossible, for someone exposed to the elements without shelter. For 49 days, Siddhartha sat motionless beneath the tree, descending through layers of consciousness, confronting and transcending the attachments and illusions that bind humans to suffering. Buddhist texts describe these weeks as a spiritual battle of cosmic significance, with Mara, the personification of death and desire, sending armies of demons to break the meditator's concentration, offering temptations of power and pleasure, threatening destruction if the meditation continued. Siddhartha remained unmoved, his consciousness penetrating deeper into the of reality itself, approaching the breakthrough that would transform him from earnest seeker into fully awakened Buddha. But even as spiritual battles raged in dimensions beyond normal human perception, physical threats emerged in the mundane world, natural forces indifferent to the significance of what was occurring beneath that tree. On what would be the final week of meditation, dark clouds gathered with ominous speed, the sky transforming from clear blue to threatening grey in the span of minutes. Wind began to rise, bending trees and scattering leaves, building toward the kind of storm that could last hours or days, drenching everything in its path with torrential rain. For a man sitting exposed in meditation, vulnerable and unmoving, such a storm represented genuine danger. Prolonged exposure to cold rain could lead to hypothermia, even in tropical climates, could break concentration through sheer physical discomfort, could transform the sight of potential enlightenment into a sodden misery that made continued meditation impossible. The storm approached with the kind of supernatural timing that makes one suspect more than mere meteorological coincidence, as if Mara, having failed to break Siddhartha's concentration through spiritual assault, now attempted to use itself as a weapon against the meditating ascetic. This is when Mucalinda emerged from the depths. The Naga king ruled the lake or river system near Bodh Gaya, dwelling in underwater palaces carved from living stone, commanding the allegiance of countless lesser serpent beings throughout his domain. He had witnessed Siddhartha, Vail Powell had observed the meditation begin and perhaps sensed through ways available to beings of his that something unprecedented was occurring beneath the Bodhi tree. When the storm broke with full force, rain hammering down in sheets and wind howling through the grove, Mucalinda made his decision. He rose from the water in his full serpentine majesty, a Naga of the highest order bearing 7 heads that marked his royal status and supreme authority. His body, massive beyond normal serpent proportion, coiled beneath the meditating figure, lifting Siddhartha above the flooding groundwater and creating a stable platform that remained dry despite the deluge. His 7 heads rose above the Buddha, spreading their hoods wide to form a sheltering canopy, a living umbrella that deflected rain and blocked wind, creating a bubble of protection within the chaos of the storm. For 7 days, according to the texts, Mucalinda maintained this position without moving, without faltering, enduring the full fury of the storm while ensuring that not a single drop of rain touched the meditator beneath his protection. The image this creates has captivated Buddhist artists for more than 2,000 years. The Buddha seated in perfect meditation posture, eyes closed or partially open, expression serene and undisturbed, while above him rises the magnificent form of the 7-headed Naga, cobra hoods spread in that iconic protective display, the serpent's body coiled beneath, providing both foundation and fortress. The symbolism operates on multiple levels simultaneously, Most obviously, it demonstrates the Naga's role as protectors of Dharma, guardians who recognize genuine spiritual achievement and offer their power to ensure it can reach completion. But more profoundly, it suggests that enlightenment requires protection, that the highest spiritual attainments occur not in isolation, but under the watchful care of forces both natural and supernatural that have invested interest in such achievements. When the storm finally passed and the sky cleared, Mucalinda unwound his coils and transformed from serpentine to human form, appearing before the now enlightened Buddha as a young man of exceptional beauty, his divine evident in features too perfect to be merely mortal. He bowed deeply in recognition of what had been achieved, offering reverence to the awakened one whose consciousness had penetrated to the deepest truths of existence. The Buddha, in turn, acknowledged Mucalinda's service and protection, teaching him Dharma and establishing the relationship between Buddhist enlightenment and Naga guardianship that would characterize their interaction throughout Buddhist history. This moment of mutual recognition and respect set the pattern for how Buddhism would incorporate the ancient Naga into its cosmology, not as converted demons reluctantly serving a foreign religion, but as willing allies who recognized in Buddhist teachings something worthy of their ancient power and protection. The artistic representations of this scene that proliferate throughout Buddhist Asia reveal fascinating variations in cultural interpretation, while maintaining essential core elements. Thai depictions often show Mucalinda with elaborate crown and jewelry, emphasizing his royal status and the magnificence of his underwater kingdom. Cambodian versions integrate the image into temple architecture, with Buddha statues positioned beneath stone Naga canopies that recreate Mucalinda's protective stance. Laotian artists sometimes show the transition moment when Mucalinda changes from serpent to human form, capturing the liminal instant when scales transform to skin, and multiple heads consolidate into single human countenance. Sri Lankan and Burmese traditions maintain more austere aesthetic, focusing on the meditation itself with the Naga protection presented as reverent background rather than dominating foreground. Yet across all these variations, certain elements remain constant. The seven heads, the protective hood, the coiled body beneath, and the Buddha's undisturbed serenity despite the supernatural drama occurring around him. The theological implications of Mucalinda's protection extend beyond simple narrative into fundamental questions about the relationship between natural forces and spiritual achievement. Buddhism teaches that enlightenment comes through individual effort, through disciplined meditation and ethical conduct that no external being can grant or withhold. Yet here is a story that suggests enlightenment also requires favorable conditions: protection from both physical elements and supernatural opposition. Mucalinda does not grant Buddha enlightenment, does not teach him Dharma, or provide mystical shortcuts to awakening. What he offers is simpler and perhaps more essential: the space and security necessary for meditation to reach its natural conclusion without external disruption. This establishes the Naga as neither masters nor servants, but rather as allies, whose power creates the conditions under which human spiritual potential can fully manifest. For contemporary practitioners and devotees, the image of Mucalinda protecting the Buddha serves multiple functions. It reminds them that the Dharma has ancient protectors, that forces older than Buddhism itself recognize the value of Buddhist teachings and offered their power to ensure those teachings could survive and spread. It suggests that one's own meditation practice, however humble compared to the Buddha's world-transforming enlightenment, occurs under similar protection, that the same forces that guarded the Buddha remain available to shield sincere practitioners from distraction and danger. Most profoundly, it embodies the Buddhist understanding that awakening does not require retreating from or conquering the natural world, but rather achieving harmony with it, demonstrating the kind of consciousness that even powerful non-human beings recognize as worthy of their respect and protection. The Naga do not recognize human borders, do not acknowledge the arbitrary lines drawn on maps by kingdoms and empires that rise and fall while serpent consciousness endures across millennia. Yet, as Buddhism and local animistic traditions spread across Southeast Asia, interacting with distinct geographical features and cultural practices unique to each region, the Naga mythology evolved into fascinating variations that reveal how different peoples adapted these ancient guardians to their specific spiritual needs and environmental realities. Thailand, Laos, and Myanmar, the three nations that dominate the so-called Golden Triangle, where the Mekong River traces borders and defines territories, each developed their own relationship with the Naga, creating traditions that share fundamental cosmological principles while expressing those principles through distinctly local aesthetic choices, ritual practices, and mythological emphasis. To understand the Naga fully requires traveling through these variations, recognizing both the unity of the underlying concept and the rich diversity of its manifestation across cultures that have lived alongside these serpent gods for more than 2,000 years. Thailand's relationship with the Naga, known in Thai as Fire Naga or Naga kings, demonstrates perhaps the most elaborate integration of serpent symbolism into every level of religious and cultural expression. Thai Buddhist temples, the Wat that dominate urban and rural landscapes throughout the country, feature Naga elements with such ubiquity that their presence becomes almost invisible through sheer familiarity. Yet each appearance carries specific meaning and serves particular spiritual function. The chofa, the distinctive curved finials that decorate temple roofs at both ends of the ridge beam, take their shape from stylized Naga heads, their upward sweeping curves suggesting the cobra hood in profile, transforming the entire temple roof into a serpent body whose heads guard the structure from both ends. This architectural choice declares the temple itself as existing under Naga protection, the building sheltered by serpent guardians whose vigilance extends from the physical structure into the spiritual realm it represents. The Naga balustrades that flank staircases leading to temple entrances throughout Thailand display regional aesthetic preferences, while maintaining the essential protective function we observed at Angkor. Thai craftsmen favor flowing, almost liquid curves that emphasize the serpentine grace and flexibility, often adding elaborate scales, jeweled collars, and ornamental details that create surfaces of stunning visual complexity. The Naga heads at staircase tops typically display 5 or 7 heads, occasionally more at particularly important temples, with each head showing slightly different expression and angle, suggesting individual awareness within the collective consciousness. Devotees entering the temple pass between these stone guardians, acknowledging their presence through brief gestures of respect, why greetings directed toward beings who, while represented in stone, are understood to maintain actual watchfulness over the sacred space beyond. The psychological effect transforms the simple physical act of climbing stairs into ritual transition between mundane and sacred, between the profane world of daily concerns and the elevated consciousness appropriate for approaching the Buddha images and relics housed within. The Mekong River's relationship with Fire Naga forms one of Thailand's most enduring and actively practiced aspects of serpent veneration. The northeastern region of Isan, where the Mekong forms the border with Laos, maintains traditions of Naga worship that predate Buddhist influence, incorporating ancient animistic reverence for water spirits into syncretic practices that honor the Naga as both Buddhist protectors and primordial forces deserving respect regardless of religious framework. Communities along the river observe protocols before fishing, before drawing water for irrigation, before any activity that might disturb or disrespect the serpent rulers dwelling in the river's depths. The annual Naga Fireball Festival, occurring along the Mekong near the town of Nong Khai, draws thousands of witnesses who gather to observe mysterious balls of light that reportedly rise from the river and shoot into the sky. Phenomena attributed to the Naga kings manifesting their presence in ways visible to human eyes. Scientific explanations involving methane gas or phosphorescence fail to diminish local belief that these lights represent actual communication from beings whose existence transcends material categories and whose relationship with humanity requires ongoing maintenance through proper respect and ritual observance. Laosian Naga traditions, while sharing much with Thai practices due to historical connections and geographical proximity, emphasize certain aspects more strongly and interpret others through distinctly Lao cultural lenses. The Lao term for these beings, Fire Nark, designates the same serpent guardians but within a cosmological framework that places stronger emphasis on their role as primordial spirits, entities whose existence predates and transcends the Buddhist overlay that came later. Luang Prabang, the ancient royal capital and spiritual heart of Laos, features temples where Naga imagery combines Buddhist iconography with older animistic elements in ways that reveal the complex layering of belief systems that characterizes Lao religious consciousness. The famous Wat Sieng Thong, dating to the mid-16th century, displays Naga elements of exceptional artistry, including a stunning mosaic on the temple's rear wall depicting the tree of life guarded by Naga, whose bodies intertwine with vegetation in patterns suggesting deep ecological connection between serpent guardians and the natural world they protect. The boat racing festivals that occur throughout Laos during the annual water festival incorporate Naga symbolism at fundamental levels, with racing boats carved and painted to resemble serpents, their prows rising in stylized Naga heads, their crews understood as temporarily inhabiting the bodies of these powerful beings. The races become ritual reenactments of cosmic journeys, competitions that channel the Naga's speed and power through human effort and cooperation. Winners receive not just trophies but spiritual merit, recognition that they successfully embodied the qualities of the Naga: strength, coordination, respect for water's power, and the ability to move through that element with grace and authority. The festivals also include ceremonies where monks chant protective sutras near the river, requesting the Naga's blessing for the coming year, acknowledging their role as controllers of rain and flood. Life-givers whose cooperation determines whether the agricultural cycle will bring prosperity or hardship to communities entirely dependent on water's timely arrival and proper behavior. Myanmar's Naga traditions, influenced by the country's unique history of Theravada Buddhism mixed with deep-rooted Nat worship, present yet another variation on the serpent guardian theme. The Burmese term for these beings, Naga, or sometimes Lu, designates creatures understood as powerful spirits, requiring careful respect and strategic alliance rather than simple worship. Burmese temple architecture incorporates Naga elements differently than Thai or Cambodian styles, often placing serpent guardians at the base of stupas and pagodas, their bodies forming protective coils around the sacred structure's foundation, literally and symbolically supporting the Buddhist monument through their ancient power. The famous Shwedagon Pagoda in Yangon, Myanmar's most sacred Buddhist site, features Naga elements integrated into its cosmological program, declaring the monument as existing under protection that predates the human kingdom that built it. Burmese folklore maintains stories of specific Naga encounters that differ in character from Thai or Cambodian accounts. often emphasizing the Naga's capricious and the need for extreme care when interacting with them. Tales speak of travelers who inadvertently camped near Naga dwelling places and suffered mysterious illnesses or misfortunes until proper offerings restored balance. Other stories describe beneficial Naga who guided lost travelers to safety or revealed hidden water sources during drought, rewarding those who showed appropriate respect for the natural world and its non-human inhabitants. The moral framework emphasizes reciprocity and recognition that humans share the landscape with beings of comparable intelligence and superior power. Entities who demand acknowledgement of their priority and their continued sovereignty over domains they controlled long before humans arrived, to build villages and claim ownership. The Golden Triangle region, where Thailand, Laos, and Myanmar converge at the Mekong River, represents a zone of particularly intense Naga presence according to all three national traditions. This geographical convergence creates a focal point where serpent mythology from multiple cultures overlaps and reinforces itself, where the Mekong's power as lifeline and border simultaneously draws concentrated spiritual significance. Communities in this region maintain traditions that predate national boundaries, honoring the Naga through practices that transcend contemporary political divisions. The river itself becomes a transnational sacred space, its depths harboring beings whose territories ignore human concepts of sovereignty and whose power operates according to principles far older than the kingdoms currently claiming jurisdiction over the water's surface, and the lands those waters have shaped across geological timescales that dwarf human history. Tipo, capítulo, número, tes, título. Rituals of fire and water. Texto, título. Chapter 10. Rituals of fire and water. Contenido. The Naga do not belong exclusively to ancient history, relegated to museum displays and archaeological sites where tourists photograph stone serpents without understanding the living traditions those carvings represent. Throughout Southeast Asia, communities maintain active relationships with these serpent guardians through elaborate ceremonies, seasonal festivals, and daily practices that acknowledge the Naga's continued presence and power over the waters upon which human survival depends. These are not performances staged for cultural preservation or tourist entertainment, but genuine spiritual observances rooted in belief systems that remain vital and relevant to populations who understand themselves as existing in ongoing covenant with beings whose patience and protection must be earned through proper respect and ritual maintenance. To witness these ceremonies is to see mythology refusing to die, ancient traditions adapting to modern contexts while maintaining their essential character and purpose. The Naga Fireball Festival, known in Thai as Bang Phai Phaya Nak, represents perhaps the most spectacular and well-documented contemporary Naga ritual, occurring annually along the Mekong River in Thailand's northeastern Isan region. The festival takes place on the night of the full moon at the end of Buddhist Lent, typically falling in October according to the Western calendar, when the rainy season concludes and rivers run high with accumulated monsoon waters. Thousands of spectators gather along the riverbanks near the town of Nong Khai, their attention focused on the dark waters flowing past, waiting for phenomena that have been reported for generations and continue to occur with regularity that defies simple dismissal as superstition or mass delusion. As darkness deepens and the full moon rises over the river, witnesses claim to observe glowing spheres rising from the water's surface, reddish or pinkish balls of light that ascend vertically into the night sky before disappearing at varying heights. The number of fireballs varies from year to year, sometimes only a handful, occasionally dozens or even hundreds, according to local accounts and video documentation that has accumulated as recording technology becomes more accessible. The official explanation attributes these lights to natural phosphorescence, or methane gas, releases from decomposing organic matter in the riverbed, igniting as they reach the oxygen-rich surface and creating brief flames that rise with the gas before extinguishing. Skeptics point to this scientific framework as definitive debunking of supernatural claims, yet locals remain unconvinced that such explanations fully account for what they witness. The timing of the fireballs, their consistent appearance during this specific festival period, the locations where they manifest year after year, and certain characteristics of their movement and appearance that seem inconsistent with simple gas combustion, all contribute to persistent belief that these phenomena represent genuine manifestations of Naga presence. Whether one accepts the supernatural explanation or maintains skeptical scientific perspective, the festival itself reveals how contemporary communities continue honoring the Naga through gathering, ceremony, and collective acknowledgement of forces that transcend mundane understanding, regardless of their ultimate physical cause. The ritual preparations surrounding the Naga Fireball Festival extend far beyond passive observation of natural or supernatural phenomena. Buddhist monks conduct special ceremonies at temples along the river, chanting protective sutras and making offerings specifically directed toward the fire Naga dwelling in the Mekong's depths. These are not generic blessings, but highly specific invocations acknowledging the Serpent Kings by name and title, requesting their continued protection of the region and their willingness to manifest in ways visible to human witnesses. Lay people prepare elaborate offerings that get placed along the riverbank or set afloat on small rafts. Flowers arranged in intricate patterns, incense, sticks, numbering in the hundreds, food items carefully selected according to traditional protocols about what the Naga find acceptable. The offerings represent not payment for services rendered, but rather maintenance of relationship, tangible demonstrations that human communities remember their obligations and understand their continued occupation of these territories depends on Naga tolerance rather than inherent human right to the land and water. Boat racing festivals throughout Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia incorporate Naga symbolism and veneration into their very structure, transforming athletic competitions into ritual reenactments of cosmic journeys and demonstrations of proper relationship between humanity and the Serpent Guardians, who control the waters where races occur. The boats themselves, long, narrow vessels requiring crews of 20 to 60 rowers, depending on class and tradition, are carved and painted to resemble Naga, their prows rising in stylized serpent heads, their painted scales running the length of the hull. Before races begin, ceremonies honor both the boat spirits and the Naga of the river or lake where competition will occur. Monks blessing the vessels and crews, requesting safe passage and fair winds. The racing becomes more than sport, transforming into moving meditation where rowers must achieve perfect synchronization, must move as single organism the way a Naga's body coordinates multiple heads and countless scales into unified purposeful motion. Winners receive not just trophies, but spiritual merit, recognition that they successfully embodied qualities the Naga represent. Power channeled through discipline, strength expressing itself through grace, individual effort subordinated to collective purpose. Water blessing ceremonies occur throughout the year at countless locations where communities depend on rivers, lakes, or springs controlled by local Naga. These range from elaborate multi-day festivals involving entire villages to simple daily offerings left by individuals before drawing water for household use. The basic structure remains consistent across variations. Acknowledgement of the Naga's ownership and authority, request for permission to use the water, promise to maintain respect and avoid pollution or disrespectful behavior, offering of something valuable to demonstrate sincerity. In agricultural communities, planting season ceremonies specifically address the Naga, requesting adequate rain and protection from floods that could destroy crops before harvest. The prayers are not vague supplications to generic spirits, but specific negotiations with known entities whose personalities and preferences have been mapped through generations of interaction, and whose responses to different approaches have been carefully observed and transmitted through oral tradition and formal religious instruction. Construction projects near water sources, particularly major infrastructure like dams or bridges that significantly alter natural flow patterns, trigger especially elaborate Naga appeasement ceremonies in communities that maintain traditional beliefs alongside modern engineering confidence. These rituals acknowledge that such projects inevitably disrupt territories the Naga have controlled for millennia, potentially displacing underwater dwellings or altering conditions in ways that anger beings accustomed to stable environmental patterns. The ceremonies attempt to explain the necessity of the construction, to request the Naga's tolerance, if not active cooperation, and to promise ongoing respect despite the changes being imposed on their domain. When accidents occur during construction, when workers suffer mysterious illnesses, or structures fail in unexpected ways, traditional communities interpret these events as Naga expressing displeasure with insufficient respect or inadequate offerings. Additional ceremonies follow, attempting to identify what offense occurred and how amends might be made. Negotiations between human ambition and ancient power that must be resolved before work can safely continue. Temple renovation and maintenance projects involving Naga sculptures or architectural elements require their own specific protocols and ceremonies. The stone serpents carved into balustrades and decorating temple structures are not mere ornamentation that can be cleaned, repaired, or moved without spiritual consequence. Before any work begins, monks conduct ceremonies requesting permission from the Naga, represented in stone, explaining the necessity of maintenance work and promising that respect will be maintained throughout the process. Workers performing the actual renovation often report unusual experiences. Tools that mysteriously malfunction, weather that turns suddenly difficult despite forecasts predicting clear skies, dreams featuring serpents that seem to carry messages or warnings. These accounts circulate through communities as evidence that the stone carvings retain connection to the living Naga they represent, that treating them as dead matter rather than sacred representations risks consequences, both practical and supernatural. Modern adaptations of traditional Naga rituals reveal how these practices evolve while maintaining core spiritual principles. Urban temples in Bangkok, Phnom Penh, and Vientiane conduct Naga ceremonies modified for city contexts, where direct access to natural water sources may be limited. But spiritual need for connection with serpent guardians remains strong. Expatriate Southeast Asian communities in Europe. The Mekong River flows for more than 2,700 miles from its source in the Tibetan Plateau through China, Myanmar, Laos, Thailand, Cambodia, and Vietnam, before emptying into the South China Sea through a vast delta that has built itself grain by grain across geological time. This is one of the world's great rivers, its waters sustaining tens of millions of people, its depths concealing secrets that have resisted full scientific documentation, despite centuries of human navigation and increasingly sophisticated monitoring technology. Among these secrets, none captures imagination and generates more persistent accounts than the reported sightings of creatures that match descriptions of the Naga. Massive serpentine forms moving through the river's deepest channels, occasionally surfacing in ways that allow brief glimpses before they descend again into murky depths where visibility extends only feet and conventional explanations struggle to account for everything witnesses claim to observe. The reports follow consistent patterns across decades of accumulated testimony, creating a profile that either represents genuine encounters with unknown creatures or demonstrates remarkable consistency in how human psychology generates false perceptions under specific environmental conditions. Fishermen working the river in early morning or late evening, those liminal hours when light plays tricks and perception becomes unreliable, describe seeing undulating forms moving just below the surface, bodies thick as tree trunks, lengths that seem to extend impossibly far before disappearing into deeper water. The movement differs from known large fish species, lacking the side-to-side tail propulsion of giant catfish that inhabit the Mekong, and instead showing the vertical undulation characteristic of serpents swimming through water. Some accounts describe brief surfacing, a head or multiple heads breaking the surface for seconds before submerging. Features that witnesses struggle to articulate clearly but consistently describe as unlike any documented aquatic species, something that seems to occupy ambiguous territory between known animal categories. The physical characteristics of the Mekong itself create conditions that could support large unknown creatures while making definitive documentation exceptionally difficult. The river reaches depths exceeding 100 feet in certain sections, particularly in the stretch that flows through steep gorges near the Thai-Laotian border. The water carries heavy sediment loads during monsoon season, reducing visibility to near zero even at shallow depths, creating an environment where creatures could potentially live their entire lives without surfacing in locations or times that allow clear observation. Underwater caves and complex channel systems provide numerous hiding places and alternative routes that could allow large animals to move through the river system while avoiding areas of heavy human activity. The temperature, oxygen levels, and food supply would theoretically support reptilian life of considerable size, though mainstream biology maintains that no undiscovered species of such magnitude could exist in a river as thoroughly utilized and studied as the Mekong. Yet the sightings continue, and they come from sources that complicate simple dismissal as superstition or misidentification. Experienced fishermen who have worked the river for decades, whose livelihoods depend on understanding its ecology and behavior, report encounters that they insist differ fundamentally from known species they interact with daily. Boat operators describe underwater disturbances that seem too large and too directed to represent normal river turbulence or fish activity, movements that create wakes and eddies, suggesting passage of something massive beneath their vessels. Villagers living along isolated stretches of the river, areas where human population remains sparse, and traditional beliefs maintain stronger hold than in urbanized regions, speak matter-of-factly about the fire Naga that dwell in nearby deep pools, describing not legendary beings from ancient texts, but entities they understand as current neighbors, requiring ongoing respect and careful protocol when fishing or drawing water from sections of river those beings claim as territory. Photographic and video evidence exists, though it suffers from the limitations that characterize most cryptozoological documentation: distance, poor lighting conditions, brief duration, and image quality insufficient to rule out conventional explanations while remaining suggestive, enough to fuel continued debate and speculation. Blurry photographs show what could be large serpentine forms partially visible above the waterline, or might equally represent floating debris, known aquatic species captured at unusual angles, or simple artifacts of photographic process under challenging conditions. Video clips capture movement beneath the surface that creates distinctive wake patterns, footage that believers cite as proof of large, unknown animals, while skeptics attribute to misidentified known species or natural water phenomena that create illusions of directed movement where none actually exists. The ambiguity serves both perspectives, allowing believers to maintain their convictions while giving skeptics grounds to dismiss the evidence as insufficient for any extraordinary claims. The psychological and cultural factors that might generate false Naga sightings deserve consideration alongside possibility of genuine, unknown creatures. Humans are pattern recognition machines, evolved to detect potential threats even when evidence remains ambiguous, biased toward false positives, because missing a genuine predator carries far higher evolutionary cost than mistaking harmless phenomena for danger. In regions where Naga mythology saturates cultural consciousness, where children grow up hearing stories about serpent guardians dwelling in local waters, the cognitive framework exists to interpret ambiguous stimuli through that lens, to see Naga where less culturally primed observers might see nothing unusual or recognize known animal species behaving in unfamiliar ways. The liminal lighting conditions when most sightings occur, that threshold time between day and night when human vision operates least reliably, creates optimal circumstances for pareidolia and misidentification. The brain filling gaps in sensory data with expectations drawn from cultural knowledge rather than actual observation. Yet dismissing all accounts as cultural projection and misidentification requires assuming that every witness across decades of reports suffers from identical perceptual failures, that no one among thousands of observers possesses the visual acuity or skeptical mindset to recognize they are misidentifying known phenomena. It requires believing that a river system supporting massive catfish species, weighing hundreds of pounds, harboring crocodiles and pythons of substantial size, somehow could not possibly conceal other large reptilian species that have evolved to remain elusive and avoid human contact. The scientific principle that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence applies here. But so does the reminder that absence of definitive proof is not proof of absence, that our knowledge of riverine ecosystems remains incomplete despite centuries of study, and that new large species continue to be documented, even in the 21st century, in regions previously assumed to be thoroughly catalogued and understood. The most intriguing accounts come from witnesses who claim more than brief glimpses, who describe extended observations under conditions allowing detailed examination of features that resist explanation through conventional biology. A Buddhist monk meditating on a riverbank platform describes watching a creature with multiple heads surface in the pre-dawn darkness, remaining visible for several minutes while apparently drinking or filtering water. Displaying movements and morphology he insists match no known species despite his extensive experience with the river's normal wildlife. A government surveyor working on a remote stretch of the Mekong reports his boat passing over something large enough to create significant displacement, the creature visible as a massive shadow beneath the hull, its length exceeding that of his 30-foot vessel, its shape distinctly serpentine rather than fish-like. A photographer attempting to document the Naga fireball phenomenon captures images of disturbances in the water that seem to show something large ascending from depth immediately before lights emerge. Suggestive timing that either represents extraordinary coincidence or supports traditional beliefs linking the fireballs directly to Naga manifestation. The question of whether these sightings represent genuine encounters with unknown creatures or complex interactions between human psychology, cultural expectations, and ambiguous sensory data may never receive definitive resolution. The Mekong keeps its secrets, the depths maintaining mysteries that resist easy penetration despite modern technology and scientific methodology. What remains certain is that communities along the river continue to report these encounters, continue to structure their relationship with the water around the understanding that it belongs to beings whose full remains incompletely known and potentially unknowable through scientific frameworks that demand reproducible observation and physical specimens as proof of existence. Tipo, capítulo, número 12, título, benevolence and wrath intertwined. Texto, título. Chapter 12, benevolence and wrath intertwined. Contenido. The Naga possess no morality in the human sense, no ethical framework derived from philosophical texts or religious commandments that divide actions into categories of good and evil, righteous and sinful, permitted and forbidden. They operate according to principles far older and more fundamental than human moral systems, responding to respect with protection and to disrespect with consequences that range from mild warning to devastating retribution. This is not capriciousness or arbitrary cruelty, but rather enforcement of natural law, maintenance of boundaries that must be observed if the delicate balance between human civilization and the forces controlling water is to remain stable. Understanding the Naga requires abandoning simplistic categorization of beings, purely benevolent or malevolent, embracing instead the complexity of entities who embody both nourishment and destruction, who give life through the waters they control and can equally withdraw that gift when the covenant binding them to humanity suffers violation through contempt, pollution, or willful ignorance of protocols established across millennia of shared existence. Traditional accounts preserved in oral histories and temple chronicles record numerous instances where Naga benevolence manifested in ways that transformed human fortune from desperate to prosperous. A village suffering prolonged drought, crops withering in fields that should be green with rice, but instead crack under relentless sun. Elders gather to determine what offense might have angered the local Naga and how amends might be made. After consultation with monks and examination of recent events, they identify a merchant who dumped waste into the river while passing through, showing contempt for warnings about proper treatment of sacred water. The community conducts elaborate purification ceremonies. The merchant makes substantial offerings and public apology. And within days, rain begins to fall in patterns that locals interpret as deliberate response rather than meteorological coincidence. The crops recover, harvest proceeds successfully, and the story enters community memory as demonstration that the Naga respond to genuine contrition and restored respect with renewed cooperation and blessing. Fishermen who observe proper protocols before casting nets, who leave first catch as offering and maintain gratitude for what the river provides rather than approaching with attitude of entitled exploitation, report consistent success that seems to exceed what probability alone would predict. Their nets fill with fish of good size and quality. They avoid the accidents and equipment failures that plague less respectful colleagues. Their families prosper through seasons when others struggle. These patterns could represent simple luck, random variation in outcomes that humans interpret through cultural frameworks that assume supernatural causation where none actually exists. Or they could indicate that the Naga genuinely observe human behavior and direct resources toward those who demonstrate understanding that the river belongs to the Serpent guardians first, and humans access those resources through ongoing permission rather than inherent right. The fishermen themselves express no doubt about which explanation holds truth. Their relationship with the Naga, as real and consequential as their relationship with any human authority, whose cooperation their livelihood requires. But the Naga's duel reveals itself most dramatically when disrespect crosses thresholds that cannot be tolerated without response. A development company begins construction near a sacred pool, known for generations as home to a powerful seven-headed Naga, ignoring warnings from local communities and proceeding without proper ceremonies or offerings. Workers report strange occurrences from the first day, equipment malfunctions without apparent cause. Workers fall ill with fevers that resist medical treatment. Accidents occur with frequency that exceeds normal construction site expectations. The company dismisses these problems as coincidence or poor safety practices. Doubles down on the project, accelerates the timeline despite mounting evidence that something opposes their presence. Then, the pool itself responds. Water that remained clear and calm for decades suddenly turns turbulent, waves rising impossibly high for such a small contained body, flooding the construction site and destroying equipment worth substantial sums. The company finally consults with local religious authorities, conducts the ceremonies they should have performed initially, makes offerings of appropriate scale and sincerity. The disturbances cease. Construction proceeds without further incident, but at significantly higher cost than proper initial respect would have required. Pollution of sacred waters provokes Naga wrath with particular intensity and persistence. A factory upstream from a village begins releasing chemical waste into a river section known as Naga territory. The poisonous discharge turning water strange colors and killing fish in numbers that alarm communities dependent on the river for food and livelihood. Traditional protocols demand immediate cessation and elaborate purification, but the factory owners, operating from distant cities and motivated by profit calculations that assign no value to ancient covenants, continue the pollution despite protests. The Naga response, according to local accounts, manifests through escalating consequences. First, minor flooding damages the factory's lower levels. Then, key equipment begins failing in ways that puzzle technicians. Breakdowns that seem almost deliberately designed to maximize repair costs and production delays. Workers begin reporting disturbing dreams, featuring serpents and drowning, psychological stress that leads to increased absenteeism and reduced efficiency. Finally, during what should be minor seasonal flooding, the river rises far beyond predicted levels, targeting the factory with precision that seems impossible for natural phenomena, destroying facilities and forcing permanent closure. The village downstream celebrates this outcome as justice delivered by the Naga, whose territory suffered violation, divine retribution against those who believed modern industry existed beyond the reach of ancient powers. The consequences for individual violations follow patterns that reveal sophisticated understanding of proportional response and targeted punishment. A young man, drunk and foolish, urinates into a sacred spring while his friends laugh and encourage the desecration. Within hours, he develops a rash that spreads across his body, resisting all medical treatment, causing intense discomfort that disrupts his ability to work or sleep. His family recognizes the symptoms as Naga curse, consults with religious specialists, and determines the appropriate offering and apology ritual. Once these obligations are fulfilled with genuine contrition, the rash disappears as mysteriously as it appeared, leaving no trace except the story that circulates through the community as warning about respecting sacred waters, regardless of intoxication or peer pressure. The punishment fits the offense, severe enough to cause real suffering and serve as effective deterrent, but not so extreme as to cause permanent harm to someone whose violations stemmed from ignorance and poor judgment rather than malicious intent. More serious violations receive correspondingly harsher responses. Ancient accounts speak of individuals who deliberately destroyed Naga shrines or killed serpents in sacred locations. Actions that demonstrated not mere disrespect, but active hostility toward the guardians and contempt for the spiritual frameworks that sustain their communities. These violators reportedly suffered fates that ranged from lingering illness to fatal accidents that seemed timed to deliver maximum message about cause and consequence. Families could be affected across generations when the offense was severe enough, entire lineages experiencing misfortune that only ended when descendants performed elaborate atonement rituals and demonstrated through sustained proper behavior that they rejected their ancestors' contempt and embraced appropriate reverence. These multi-generational consequences seem excessive by modern ethical standards that emphasize individual responsibility, but they reflect older understanding where family units, rather than isolated individuals, formed the basic social unit, and where maintaining proper relationship with supernatural powers required collective, rather than merely personal, observance. The delicate balance between Naga benevolence and potential wrath creates psychological framework where respect becomes not abstract virtue, but practical necessity, where proper protocol serves survival function rather than merely fulfilling religious obligation. Children growing up in traditional communities learn these lessons through stories that emphasize consequences of disrespect alongside rewards for proper behavior, internalizing understanding that water belongs to beings whose tolerance allows human use, but whose patience has limits that must not be tested. Adults transmit this knowledge through formal instruction and casual modeling, demonstrating through daily actions how to approach rivers and wells with appropriate reverence, how to make offerings that acknowledge Naga authority, how to read signs that might indicate displeasure, requiring immediate response before minor irritation escalates into serious conflict. The entire cultural apparatus surrounding water use in traditional Southeast Asian communities reflects this understanding that humans share the landscape with powers that demand recognition and respect, that civilization exists through ongoing negotiation rather than unilateral human dominion over natural resources. Modern tensions between traditional respect for Naga and contemporary development priorities create ongoing conflicts that test whether ancient covenants can survive in contexts where economic calculation and scientific frameworks dominate decision-making processes. When governments approve dam projects or industrial facilities that traditional communities insist will anger the Naga, collision occurs between worldviews that struggle to find common ground or mutual comprehension. The traditional perspective sees disaster and suffering as inevitable when supernatural guardians suffer disrespect, while modern perspective dismisses these concerns as superstition that cannot be allowed to impede necessary development. Yet, when projects proceed, despite warnings, and subsequently experience the kind of problems, accidents, and cost overruns that traditional communities predicted, the question arises whether superior understanding lies with ancient wisdom or modern certainty about the non-existence of forces that traditional belief systems treat as fundamental reality. Palabras, 1497, completado, true. The 21st century moves at speeds that would bewilder ancestors who measured time by agricultural cycles and monsoon patterns. Yet the Naga refuse to become mere relics confined to museum displays and academic footnotes about extinct belief systems. Throughout contemporary Southeast Asia, these ancient serpent guardians maintain presence in ways that range from subtle cultural undercurrents to overt national symbols, their scaled forms appearing on everything from corporate logos to government seals, from architectural ornaments on modern buildings to digital animations in popular media. This persistence reveals something profound about cultural identity and the human need for connection to stories older than the current moment, traditions that provide continuity and meaning in contexts where rapid change threatens to sever present from past. The Naga adapt, evolve, find new expressions, while maintaining their essential character as beings who bridge multiple realms and embody the relationship between humanity and forces beyond human control. National emblems and official seals throughout the region incorporate Naga imagery with frequency that demonstrates how thoroughly these beings have become woven into collective identity at the highest institutional levels. The Royal Thai Armed Forces Supreme Command displays the Garuda, traditional enemy of the Naga, but numerous other Thai government agencies and royal organizations feature serpent guardians as primary or supporting elements in their official insignia. The reasoning extends beyond aesthetic choice into symbolic statement about authority and legitimacy, the Naga's presence declaring that these institutions operate under protection of forces recognized for millennia, that their power derives not merely from modern political structures, but from deeper roots connecting contemporary authority to ancient covenants and divine sanction. Cambodia's national identity remains particularly intertwined with Naga symbolism through the foundational myth we explored earlier, the union between Indian prince and Serpent princess that created the Khmer people themselves. This origin story appears in countless official contexts, reminding citizens and foreign observers alike that Cambodian civilization exists through Naga blessing and maintains special relationship with these guardians that other nations cannot claim. Architectural applications of Naga symbolism in contemporary construction reveal fascinating tensions between tradition and modernity, between desire to honor ancient forms and pressure to create structures that signal progress and international sophistication. New hotels in Bangkok, Siem Reap, and Vientiane incorporate traditional Naga balustrades flanking entrance staircases, but rendered in materials and styles that declare these buildings as thoroughly modern rather than historical recreations. Glass and steel, Naga emerge from architectural imagination, their forms abstracted and stylized, while remaining recognizable as the seven-headed guardians whose stone ancestors watch over ancient temples. Shopping centers and office complexes feature decorative elements derived from Naga imagery, transforming sacred symbols into commercial aesthetics that some traditional communities view as inappropriate commodification, while others celebrate as evidence that the old stories maintain relevance and power, even in contexts far removed from religious observance. The debate about whether such usage honors or exploits Naga symbolism remains unresolved, playing out in discussions that reveal deeper anxieties about cultural authenticity and the costs of modernization. Corporate logos throughout Southeast Asia frequently incorporate serpent imagery that draws directly or indirectly from Naga mythology, companies seeking to associate their brands with the power, wisdom, and protective qualities these beings represent. Water utilities and irrigation companies particularly favor such symbolism, the connection between Naga and water control making the choice seem natural and appropriate. But the imagery extends far beyond water-related industries, into telecommunications, banking, tourism, and countless other sectors, where marketers calculate that Naga associations will generate positive consumer response and brand recognition. The effectiveness of such strategies suggests that Naga symbolism retains psychological resonance even among urban populations, who may not actively practice traditional religious observances, that something in the collective unconscious still responds to these ancient serpent forms with recognition and respect that transcends rational calculation about supernatural existence. Popular media representations of the Naga demonstrate both continuity with traditional depictions and innovative adaptations that reflect contemporary storytelling preferences and technological capabilities. Thai cinema and television have produced numerous productions featuring Naga as central characters or important plot elements, ranging from horror films where serpent beings serve as antagonists threatening human communities, to romantic dramas where Naga take human form and fall in love with mortals in stories that echo ancient themes of cross-species union and the complications that arise when beings from different realms attempt to build relationships. Computer-generated imagery allows visualization of the Naga with spectacular detail and movement impossible in earlier eras, seven heads spreading and swaying independently, scales shimmering with iridescent complexity, underwater palaces rendered with architectural sophistication that rivals anything human kingdoms have produced. These modern representations introduce the Naga to new generations who encounter the serpent guardians first through screens rather than temple visits, raising questions about how digital mediation transforms understanding and relationship with beings traditionally experienced through stone carvings, religious ceremonies, and oral storytelling. Tourism industries throughout the region market Naga imagery and mythology as distinctive cultural attractions that differentiate Southeast Asian destinations from competitors and provide narratives that help visitors make sense of the temples, festivals, and customs they encounter. Tour guides at Angkor Wat explain the Naga balustrades to international visitors, translating complex cosmological concepts into accessible stories about serpent guardians and their role in Khmer civilization. The Naga Fireball Festival attracts tourists from around the world, visitors mixing with local devotees to witness phenomena that may or may not represent supernatural manifestation, but certainly represent living cultural tradition that has survived into the present. Souvenir shops overflow with Naga representations in every conceivable form: carved wood, cast metal, ceramic figurines, printed t-shirts, refrigerator magnets, and countless other items that allow tourists to carry home tangible reminders of encounters with mythology that remains vital rather than merely historical. The commercialization troubles some traditionalists who fear reduction of sacred symbols to mere decorative objects stripped of spiritual significance, while others argue that wider distribution of Naga imagery, even through commercial channels, serves to maintain awareness and prevent these traditions from fading into obscurity. Environmental movements in Southeast Asia have begun appropriating Naga symbolism to advocate for water protection and sustainable resource management, recognizing that ancient religious frameworks about respecting Naga-controlled waters align surprisingly well with contemporary ecological concerns about pollution, over-extraction, and climate change impacts on freshwater systems. Activists argue that traditional belief in Naga guardianship provided effective conservation ethic for millennia, communities managing water resources sustainably because they understood those resources as belonging to beings who would punish exploitation and reward careful stewardship. Campaigns against dam construction or industrial pollution invoke both scientific arguments about ecological damage and traditional warnings about angering the Naga, attempting to build coalitions between modern environmentalism and ancient religious reverence. The effectiveness of such strategies remains contested, but the attempt itself demonstrates how Naga mythology continues evolving to address contemporary challenges, while maintaining its essential character as framework for understanding proper human relationship with water and the forces controlling it. Educational initiatives in some Southeast Asian nations incorporate Naga mythology into curricula as a way of teaching cultural heritage and fostering connection to traditional knowledge systems. Students learn origin stories, examine temple architecture, discuss how ancient communities understood their relationship with supernatural guardians and natural resources. The pedagogical approach varies, some programs treating the material as historical cultural artifact, while others maintain more ambiguous stance about the Naga's actual existence, allowing students to engage the mythology through multiple interpretive frameworks simultaneously. Critics argue such education risks promoting superstition that conflicts with scientific worldview schools should foster, while defenders counter that cultural literacy requires understanding belief systems that shaped civilizations for thousands of years, regardless of whether those beliefs align with current scientific consensus about what exists and what does not. The persistence of Naga symbolism and belief into the contemporary era, their presence across such diverse contexts, from government seals to popular entertainment to environmental activism, reveals mythology as living tradition rather than historical curiosity. The Serpent Guardians refuse obsolescence, adapting to new media and contexts while maintaining core associations with water, power, protection, and the relationship between human ambition and forces that transcend human control. Whether understood as literal beings inhabiting rivers and lakes, as psychological archetypes representing human relationship with awe, or as cultural symbols carrying layers of meaning accumulated across millennia, the Naga continue shaping how millions of people across Southeast Asia understand their place in cosmos larger and stranger than modernist frameworks fully acknowledge or contemporary certainties can completely explain. Tipo, capítulo, número 14, título, the eternal coil, texto, título. Chapter 14, the eternal coil, contenido. We have traveled together through waters, both literal and mythological, descended into depths where stone serpents guard temple thresholds, and living Naga coil in river channels beyond reach of human certainty. We have traced these beings from their origins in the churning of the cosmic ocean to their continued presence in festivals where modern witnesses claim to observe mysterious lights rising from the Mekong surface. We have examined their anatomy and hierarchy, explored their role in founding kingdoms and protecting enlightened consciousness, witnessed their duel as givers of life and deliverers of consequences when respect fails and ancient protocols suffer violation. Now, as this journey reaches its conclusion, we must ask what the Naga ultimately represent, what wisdom these ancient serpent guardians offer to contemporary humanity, racing toward futures that seem increasingly divorced from the natural world and the spiritual frameworks that sustained civilizations for millennia before industrial revolution and digital transformation convinced us that technology and human ingenuity alone suffice to navigate existence. The Naga embody a truth that modern consciousness struggles to accept. We are not masters of the natural world, but participants in systems vastly older and more complex than our civilizations, our technologies, our confident assertions about having transcended primitive superstition through scientific enlightenment. Water remains essential to human survival, as fundamental now as when the first agricultural communities settled along riverbanks and learned to negotiate with forces controlling flood and drought. We have built dams and treatment facilities, developed irrigation systems and water management infrastructures that seem to place these resources under complete human control. Yet every drought and flood that exceeds our predictions reminds us that control remains partial, conditional, dependent on cooperation from systems that operate according to principles we incompletely understand, despite centuries of hydrology and climate. The Naga offer a framework for understanding this reality, personifying, in mythological form, the basic ecological truth that water belongs to processes larger than human needs and human timelines, that our access depends on maintaining balance rather than assuming dominion. The respect protocols surrounding Naga veneration translate directly into practical conservation ethics that contemporary environmentalism struggles to motivate through abstract scientific arguments and distant projections about future consequences. When communities understand rivers as inhabited by conscious beings who respond to treatment with blessing or punishment, who maintain long memories and demand ongoing reciprocity rather than one-time transactions, those communities manage water resources with care that purely utilitarian frameworks fail to generate. You do not casually pollute water where your grandmother's Naga dwells. Do not over-extract from springs protected by serpent guardians your children will need to appease. Do not approach these resources with attitude of entitled consumption, but rather with gratitude for access and awareness that permission can be withdrawn if respect fails. Modern environmental movements advocating sustainable resource management essentially attempt to recreate through secular reasoning what traditional Naga veneration achieved through spiritual framework, suggesting that ancient religious practices sometimes encoded practical wisdom that survives translation into contemporary contexts, even when literal belief in the supernatural beings central to those practices has faded. The architectural legacy of Naga guardianship reveals how mythology shapes physical space and social organization in ways that persist long after the religious contexts that generated those forms have weakened or transformed. The temples of Angkor, the urban Wat throughout Thailand, the sacred sites scattered across Laos and Myanmar, all declare through their Naga-guarded entrances and serpent-flanked causeways that certain spaces exist under special protection. That transition from ordinary to sacred requires acknowledgement of powers whose authority transcends human governance. Contemporary secular societies struggle to create comparable sense of sacred space and threshold consciousness, finding that designating locations as protected parks or heritage sites generates compliance based on law and enforcement rather than internalized reverence and voluntary respect. The difference matters. Laws require constant policing and generate resentment among those who view restrictions as arbitrary human impositions. Sacred spaces protected by supernatural guardians generate self-enforcement through belief that violation carries consequences beyond human punishment, that the Naga themselves watch and respond, regardless of whether human authorities observe the transgression. The foundation myths linking royal lineages to Naga ancestry speak to deep human need for legitimacy that transcends mere military power or political maneuvering, for authority grounded in something more permanent than shifting human allegiances and transient worldly success. Modern democracies derive legitimacy from electoral processes and constitutional frameworks, systems that work well when populations accept those mechanisms as valid, but that face crisis when significant portions of society reject the fundamental premises underlying democratic governance. Ancient kingdoms, claiming descent from unions between human princes and serpent princesses, established authority through narrative that connected rulers to forces everyone recognized as real and powerful, regardless of political affiliation or personal ambition. The Naga did not care about human factional disputes. Their protection extended to kingdoms that maintained proper relationship with them, rather than to particular rulers or dynasties. This created stability through shared belief in supernatural framework, transcending human political divisions, a form of social cohesion that modern, purely secular societies struggle to replicate. The Mucalinda narrative, the Serpent King protecting the meditating Buddha from the storm, offers profound meditation on relationship between spiritual achievement and natural world. Enlightenment did not occur through rejection of or transcendence beyond material concerns into pure abstract consciousness, but rather through achieving harmony with natural forces represented by the Naga, who recognize the Buddha's attainment as worthy of their protection. Contemporary spiritual seekers often conceptualize advancement as movement away from the physical toward the purely mental or spiritual, as if the body and the natural world represent obstacles to be overcome rather than essential contexts within which consciousness develops and expresses itself. The image of Buddha beneath Mucalinda's protective hood suggests different understanding, one where highest spiritual realization occurs, not despite the physical world, but within it, sheltered by forces that acknowledge genuine achievement and offer their ancient power to ensure it can reach completion and benefit beings beyond the individual practitioner. The reported Naga sightings in the Mekong, whatever their ultimate explanation in terms of undiscovered species or misidentified phenomena or pure cultural projection, demonstrate that certain mysteries resist definitive resolution through scientific methodology alone. That ambiguity can be productive rather than merely frustrating. that not everything must be captured, catalogued, and fully explained to retain validity and meaning. The river keeps its secrets, maintaining pockets of uncertainty in a world increasingly mapped and monitored, and convinced that given sufficient technology and research funding, every mystery will eventually yield to human investigation. Perhaps some secrets deserve protection. Perhaps certain ambiguities serve essential functions in maintaining humility and wonder. Perhaps the Mekong's refusal to conclusively prove or disprove the Naga's physical existence represents wisdom rather than obstinacy. As we conclude this exploration of Southeast Asia's seven-headed serpent gods, I invite you to carry these stories with you, to consider what they reveal about human relationship with water and wilderness, about the value of maintaining reverence for forces beyond our complete control, about the wisdom encoded in mythologies that have sustained civilizations across millennia. If these journeys into the old stories resonate with you, if you find value in exploring mythologies that refuse to die and traditions that adapt while maintaining their essential truths, consider subscribing to Echoes of the Old World. Together, we will continue traversing the territories where ancient beliefs shape contemporary consciousness, where stone guardians watch over thresholds between worlds, where the past speaks to the present in languages older than writing, but no less articulate for their reliance on symbol, story, and the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who understood that surviving in this world requires respecting the powers that sustain it. The Naga coil in their underwater kingdoms, their multiple heads maintaining eternal vigilance over waters that give and take life according to principles both natural and supernatural, both comprehensible and ultimately mysterious. They watch as human civilizations rise and fall, as technologies advance and certainties crumble, as each generation believes itself finally free from primitive superstition, only to discover that some truths persist regardless of what intellectual frameworks claim to have superseded them. The Serpent Guardians endure because water endures, because the relationship between humanity and the forces controlling that essential element remains as crucial now as when the first settlements formed along riverbanks and learned to negotiate with powers whose cooperation determined survival or extinction. In an age of climate crisis and ecological disruption, perhaps the Naga have never been more relevant, their mythology never more urgent. In its reminder that we share this world with forces that demand respect, forces that will outlast our arrogance and witness whether wisdom or hubris ultimately characterizes our species. The choice remains ours, but the Naga watch, patient as stone, ancient as water, eternal as the cycle that brings rain from sky to earth to river to ocean and back again in patterns older than human memory and longer than human time. Palabras, 1496, completado, true.